You have a rule inside you. You didn't choose it. You didn't learn it from a book. Somewhere between the age of 2 and 6, your brain quietly decided that anyone you grew up sleeping beside, eating beside, being raised beside, was off limits. Forever. No lecture required. But here's the strange part. That rule almost didn't need to exist, and for a long stretch of human history it barely did. Let's go back. Not centuries. Hundreds of thousands of years. Small bands. 20, maybe 30 people. Wandering the same valley, the same coastline, the same forest edge, generation after generation. No neighboring village 3 miles away. No app, no market, no chance encounter at a well. Just the same faces every day for your entire life. So who are you supposed to have children with? This is the question that geneticists started asking when they cracked open the genomes of our ancestors, and the answer was uncomfortable. In small, isolated populations, close relative pairings weren't a scandal. They were sometimes the only option on the table. In 2022, a team led by geneticist Marta Mirazon-Lar examined the remains of 2 Neanderthal groups in Siberia. What they found inside the DNA was staggering. Signs of inbreeding so consistent that some individuals carried the genetic fingerprint of first cousin or even closer pairings. Not a one-time accident, a pattern, a structural feature of small, isolated bands trying to survive. And Neanderthals weren't unique in this. A separate genome study out of the Max Planck Institute, associated with paleogeneticist Svante Pääbo's lab, found similar signatures buried in ancient human DNA from small, isolated populations scattered around the world. Iceland, remote Pacific islands, isolated valleys in the Alps. Wherever the group was small and the world outside was hard to reach, the same pattern kept showing up. So was it common? In some populations, yes, shockingly common. But here's where the story gets interesting, because common doesn't mean comfortable, and comfortable is not the same as accepted. Because right alongside the genetic evidence of inbreeding, anthropologists kept finding something else. Rules. Elaborate, complicated, deeply enforced rules about exactly who you were allowed to pair with. Kinship systems so intricate that early anthropologists spent entire careers just trying to map them on paper. Claude Lévi-Strauss, the French anthropologist who spent decades studying kinship structures across hundreds of cultures, argued that the incest taboo wasn't the exception to human society, it was the foundation of it. His theory was blunt. The rule against pairing with your closest relatives is what forced early humans to look outward, to trade women, alliances, and resources with the group in the next valley. Marriage became a bridge. Suddenly, 2 bands that might have fought each other for territory were bound together by grandchildren they shared. In other words, the taboo wasn't just about biology, it was survival technology. It turned strangers into family. But why did the rule feel so automatic? Why does it live in your gut instead of your rule book? This is where a Finnish sociologist named Edvard Westermark comes back into the story. In the late 1800s, long before anyone could read a genome, Westermark proposed something radical for his time. He said humans develop a natural sexual aversion to anyone they were raised alongside during early childhood. Not because a parent told them to, not because a priest warned them, because the brain itself, sometime in those first few years, quietly filed that person under family, and family got permanently removed from the list. For decades, this was just a theory. Then came the kibbutzim. In 20th century Israel, communal settlements raised unrelated children together from infancy, cohabiting like siblings even though they shared no blood. Sociologist Joseph Schepper studied thousands of these kibbutz-raised pairs decades later. The result was almost eerie in its consistency. Out of nearly 3,000 marriages among kibbutz members, almost none occurred between 2 people raised together from before the age of 6. Not because it was banned, nobody forbade it. They simply didn't want to. The attraction had been quietly switched off by proximity in early childhood, exactly as Westermark predicted, 100 years before anyone tested it. So here is what the evidence actually paints. 2 forces, running in parallel, sometimes in conflict. Biology handed small, isolated ancient populations a real problem. Limited partners, long stretches where the nearest unrelated person might be a 2-week walk away. And so genetically, inbreeding happened, sometimes out of necessity, sometimes because a band had shrunk. After famine or disease, and there was, quite literally, no one else left. But running underneath that necessity was something older and quieter. An instinct, wired by early exposure, that made close family pairings feel wrong at a gut level long before any culture wrote it into law. And running above both of those was culture itself, layering taboo after taboo, ritual after ritual, marriage rule after marriage rule, until who you cannot marry became one of the most carefully guarded systems in every human society ever documented. Which raises the real twist. The taboo didn't appear because incest was rare. It appeared because it was possible, because the danger was close enough and common enough that every surviving culture needed a wall around it. Think about what that means. Every single society you've ever studied, no matter how isolated, no matter how different their gods, their food, their language, their laws, shares this one rule in some form. Anthropologists have never found a documented human culture without some version of an incest taboo. Not one. That kind of universality doesn't happen by accident. It happens because the pressure that created the rule was universal too, and this is where it circles back to you. Not to some distant Neanderthal valley in Siberia, to your own nervous system, right now. That instinctive recoil you feel at the idea, the one that doesn't need a law to explain itself, is a fossil, not a fossil of bone, a fossil of behavior, carved by 100,000 years of small bands figuring out, generation after generation, who was safe to build a family with and who was already family. Westermarck's instinct, Lévi-Strauss's alliance systems, and the raw genetic evidence from ancient bones are three different messengers carrying the same message. Your ancestors lived close to a line most of us never think about, and the rule you carry today, quietly, automatically, without a single lecture, is the wall they built so their children, and eventually you, wouldn't have to. You didn't inherit a taboo, you inherited a survival strategy so effective it stopped feeling like a strategy at all. It just feels like who you are.